Okay, we're continuing from slide number 83, talking about trauma and temperature, meaning that some kind of traumatic injury will affect temperature regulation or heat production or heat loss. So you can see that in slide 84, we're talking about any damage to the central nervous system where regulation occurs, inflammation, increased intracranial pressure, and intracranial bleeding will increase body temperature to above 39 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to 102 Fahrenheit, give or take a bit, due to trauma. And this may result in what we call central fever, also known as non-infectious fever. And I want to explain this. I think it came up in the first week, but just a reminder, fever, or the elevation of core temperature, can be induced by one or two mechanisms, and obviously when you have two, sometimes, or in most times, you can also have a combination of both. The first one is because of mechanical reasons or hormonal reasons, meaning that it's not because the immune system is inducing fever, which is the second one. So fever can be induced or heat production, heat increase may originate from mechanical reasons. In this case, it's usually friction that causes, let's say, that it transforms into heat immediately, almost always, if not always, that will kill a cell, right? And then you have cell death, and that provokes the immune system. And the immune system causes, a fever. Or that it's just simply immune-based, reacting to a foreign body and causing an immunal cascade. So we can see here in slide 84 that basically we have fluids, and I want to remind you that you cannot condense fluids. So when you're in a closed area, a sealed area, where the fluids have nowhere to run to or escape to, they start elevating the internal pressure because the area is pushing the fluids, trying to condense it, and they're fighting back, pushing back, and in between those two forces, the fluids and the environment or the tissues around, the mechanical pressure is elevated, and that's usually not a good thing. And that will lead to damage, and damage provokes the nervous system, or elevating fever. Elevating fever, we think of fever as a health condition, but you have to understand that fever, by definition, is increased temperature, and you can increase temperature in order to accelerate or expedite certain processes. It doesn't have to be because of the immune system. So that's that, and then we can go to slide 85, and you can see that because there's no change to what we call core temperature in this case, we have no sweating. And you'll see no responses to what we call antipyrotics, because pyrotics in the body are part of the mechanism that elevate core temperature when you have a fever. So since this is not the same mechanism, it's not going to work. And then we start the discussion about sleep in slide 86, and you can see that the first point in slide 87 is that sleep is an active brain process. The brain is not dead, it's active. That provides two major things which I think are very important to understand. One, restoration of function. There's a lot of functions that are restored to normal during sleep, And if you don't sleep, then you have a problem the next day. And consolidation of memory, meaning that in a way, during sleep, you take all your memories and all that inputted information and kind of put them in the right shelf. It's like putting, if you think about the brain and this content, it's like the end of the day at the library. People came and visited the library and took this book and put it back there, and they're putting books and accumulating a mess, basically, or inducing a mess with the books, right? And then you have the librarian that comes and has all the time in the world, so to speak, to put the books back in order and where they're supposed to be according to a certain logic, so it can be used the day after. And in theory, this would be like a library receiving new books every day and having used them the same day, putting them back during night. And if you don't do that, you wake up in the morning and you have a mess. Okay, so I hope that example helps, and that is why sleep is an important part of our day, 24-hour cycle. And when you're sleep deprived, or if you have this sleep disorders, it's definitely going to affect your function the day after, and even sometimes acutely. So let's proceed to slide number 92, and notice that we're talking about sleep disorders. We talked about this idea. It's not a disease, it's a disorder, and there's a difference. So in slide 93 and 94, we have the 4 subtypes of classifications. I just want to say that number 3 and 4 are very complex. It's not exactly in our scope and ability to diagnose, so I've decided to disregard those 2. They're very complex. They demand knowledge of psychology, and definitely the 4th goes into very picky definitions. So we're going to stick with the 2 that are given in slide 93, and those are dysomnias and parasomnias. And I think that if we understand the first one, it'll be easier to understand the second one. Meaning that dysomnias mean that you have disorders that cause you to sleep either too much or too little. Whereas the parasomnias affect your sleep, but they're not changing the extent of sleep. They're changing the process within. So those are the 2 major differences between them. And then we start talking about breaking down the different kinds of dysomnias. So you see, in regard to insomnia, that it is defined as the inability to fall asleep or stay asleep. And why am I emphasizing the word the inability? This is not a matter of will. It's not the unwilling to fall asleep. It's not the unwilling to stay asleep. It's the inability. There's a difference there. Okay, so that's a major aspect of things. And then you can see at the lower right end of slide 97, there's a typo mistake there. There's an S missing in the word that's, but also I'm indicating the word obesity. And I hope that by now you notice how many times the word obesity or diabetic, which usually comes with obesity, is mentioned and emphasized, because those are things that we can influence. And also I want you to understand how severe obesity is and what implication it has. It runs way deeper than just not looking good in the eyes of some people. Okay, in slide 98 we transition to OSAS, and I want to emphasize the 2 last points on slide 99. One is that notice that it usually is accompanied by excessive snoring, which is the result of mechanical friction. And then that it's defined as multiple apneic episodes of more than 10 seconds. So I want you to remember that definition. And then we see in the last point on slide 99 that we're talking about experiencing arousal episodes that interrupt the sleeping cycle. Thus, total sleep time is reduced, leading to sleep and REM deprivation. So it's not that they're not sleeping, they're interrupted by periods of arousal. In regards to slide 100, I just want to emphasize, because I didn't spell it out in the slide when we're talking about the second point with symptoms, that polycythemia is the phenomenon of reduced hematocrit. And then in the last point on slide 100, notice that part of the treatment is obesity management, and this is where we come in because that's what we do. So I know you kind of understand that every time that we're talking about exercise, it's us. But yes, exercise is medicine, and we're part of the treatment, and we need more and more professionals to understand that this is what we do. And this is where we come in. Of course, I hope that you understand that slide 101 is not a call to suffocate people, rather than just a joke. Okay, so now we can start talking in slide 102 about hypersomnia. Just a minute, let me turn the page here. Here we go. And notice, and this is the only point that I want to emphasize, that it is associated with OSAS, meaning that you can have hypersomnia together with OSAS. Does that mean that they necessarily happen together? No, but they are associated. Okay, talking about narcolepsy, notice in slide 105 the addition of hallucinations and sleep paralysis, which are kind of unique. Wink, wink. And then I want you to notice the word exercise in slide 106. Obviously, that's us, right? But if you look at the combination and the connection between the content of slide 105 and the content of slide 106, we're talking about something that is chemically induced and chemically treated or fixed. Then we have the sleep-wake schedule disorders. Basically, very simple idea, I think. That's the first thought that came to mind. Very easy to understand. You're messing with someone's circadian rhythm, and it's disorders, right? It's not a disease. So you can see the reasons are pretty easy to understand because we all have experience with that, probably. Rapid time zone changes. It could be moving within the US or the world. The jet lag syndrome is the most known, probably. Starting a new job or changes at work that cause you to have rotating shifts, so you're not working at the same time frames all the time, and suddenly you have night shifts. Suddenly you're sleeping during the day and not during the night, which has a lot of effects. Okay, so that's on slide 108. And just jumping to parasomnias and talking about the first one, which is sleepwalking, which we kind of all heard about, right? I just want to emphasize in slide 112 the fact that a major component in parasomnias is that you have no memory of the event. And notice that you have no memory of the event even if you were officially regarded as awake during the whole time or part of the time, and you still have no memory of the event. That's a very, very important part of things. And then in slide 113, I want to refer you to the last 2 points that I don't know who your crowd is, but if they have if they do sleepwalk, it is actually recommended to wake them, whereas once it was perceived as dangerous, today it's perceived as dangerous not to awake them or wake them up because of safety issues. These people are walking, crossing streets, going downstairs, driving. You definitely want to wake them up. And notice that it's not psychological or psychiatric based problems. They're not crazy, okay? It's not coming from there. Then if you look at slide 114, the first point where it says it may run in the family, obviously that is a hint to, is this kind of disorder genetic? Okay, then we have night terrors. You know, if you look at slide 116 and you don't recognize the figure there, I suggest that you look up Jeff Dunham on YouTube and enjoy. I find him hilarious. If you did, kudos. I like you already. Alright, slide 117. We're talking of night terrors as a sudden arousal. It's not gradual. It happens suddenly, accompanied by fear or emotions, meaning that this has a deep connection to something that you are emotional about, that moves you, that, you know, provokes you in a way, if you think about it. So something that you're afraid of, or something that causes you to respond with emotions. That is the trigger, and that is something that's supposed to run deep. Okay, fear is something that is deep. Emotions usually run deep if they are enough to cause you fear. The person is not awake when this happens, and of course, once again, they have no memory of what happened. And in adults, although it's related to night terrors, you can actually have daytime anxiety that is a delayed response or related response to the night terrors. Notice that usually happens in deep sleep, and I just use the word deep again because when you're talking about fear and deep emotions, those are the kind of processes or aspects of being alive that will provoke terrors. The word terror itself is very extreme if you think about it, so just connect the dots and understand that it's going to happen in deep sleep, because that's when you connect to deeper aspects of your existence. And you see that it takes a few hours to get to that kind of level. It has an inherited component that is in regards to the maturation of the central nervous system, and since maturation of the system is relatively fast, but full maturation takes time. It can be, it usually presents itself in children, because we're talking about maturation. So obviously an adult is supposed to be completely mature and not undergoing maturation, but it's not necessarily in young age. It can also appear in adolescence, and it can stick to adults too. Then we have RLS. Basically what we're looking at RLS is a neurological problem that is induced by chemical imbalance. And we can talk about the lack or excessive amounts of a certain ion or molecule substance that causes RLS. And by the way, I don't know if you can see it, but right now I'm moving my leg because I have RLS. Just to explain slide 121 in case you didn't get it, since slide 120 is talking about a family background, I thought it'd be funny to, blame the parents. Okay, let's relate to slide 122. And we're talking about dopamine, which is my problem. I'm hyperdopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter with a lot of energy, and you need to waste that energy to get it out of the system. That's why I move my leg a lot of times. So if you've ever seen me do that, I'm not nervous, I'm not angry. It's simply RLS, and it's a chemical-based problem. In theory, I could take medication for it. I insist I'm not. I don't want. I'd rather move my leg than bring in more chemicals into my body. And then you can also see iron deficiency. And of course, I want to remind you about the periodical table and ions that have, an above plus or beneath -2 electrical charge, and they are always troublemakers. So iron is, or ferrin is +3. That's a major problem maker. And then if we look at slide 124, we're talking about visual dysfunction, and 3 points come to mind. One, it depends on supply or the lack of. It usually will affect somehow muscles, because muscles are major influences of function. At the end of the day or at the end of the process, somehow we reach muscles usually. And of course, we're talking about neural aspects. So one of the 3 or any combination of. So I'm just going to jump to slide number 127. I think that the one in between is pretty simple. And I want to emphasize in the second point in the slide, the phrase in sync. In sync, of course, is a direct referral to the nervous system. And then you see in slide number 129, the first point says, most likely due to muscle control and not muscle strength. Meaning that the origin of the problem is not in muscle size, not in hypertrophy, not in the number of cells, rather the activation, the control of the muscle. And this is a difference. It has nothing to do with muscle mass, okay? It's a neural process, as we've spoken before that. If we talk about nystagmus, notice that we're talking about both eyes. Okay, just to emphasize that. And of course, I've used plural in the word eyes in the first point, but just to emphasize that, because in other conditions we're going to talk about one eye or the other at times. Then in slide 133, I just want to tell you that in the second point of complications, you see that one of the reasons, or one of the symptoms, may include diplopia, which is double vision. Okay, I didn't spell that out, so I just wanted to emphasize that. Then we're talking about vision equity or vision sharpness. In other words, it's simply English. And we're talking about, notice in slide number 135, the first point is as follows: the inability to see objects in sharp detail. The word sharp immediately indicates that it's light related to light, and it's going to affect the clearness of vision. Okay, not the lack or existence of vision, but the clearness of vision. Okay, notice that. And then in the same slide 135, the third point, causes. The second cause, amblyopia, I just want to explain that is the reduced vision in one eye, usually because there's some kind of discoordination between the brain and the eye. Okay, so it's a neural thing. Just to emphasize that. And then when we're talking about glaucoma, slide 137, notice that the first point says as follows: an intraocular pressure greater than 22 millimeters Hg. What are we talking about? We're talking about mechanical pressure. Okay, we're talking about a crushing force in this case. If you read the whole slide, you understand that we're talking about a force that is big enough to crush in the area, affecting fluids. There's the effect of muscles, right? And there's also a lack of supply. So this, for instance, is a great example of how all three things that we talked about with dysfunction come together and cause glaucoma. Okay, slide 139. Notice that we're talking about a chronic condition. Okay, it's not acute. It means that it's been happening for a long time or is here to stay, so to speak. And the most interesting and probably center phrase used in slide 140 when it comes to angle closure glaucoma is the word displacement, meaning that you actually have a part, the iris in this case, that literally moved. It's not in the wrong place. It's not in the right place, sorry. It's in the wrong place. My bad. So, you know, once again, that takes us back to structure and function. Okay, and when you move something to the wrong place, it might raise the pressure in that area, and pressure usually on nerves leads to pain. If we go to slide 142, the third point of the slide, when we're talking about, you know, congenital closure glaucoma, we're talking about a malformation, meaning this is part of birth, right? Part of the creation of the structure of the eye during birth. So something in the execution of the orders of how to build the structure of the eye goes wrong. And obviously, as we said, structure and function are one of the main principles. Okay, now in slide 143, although it's the title, I think it almost gives away everything. Look at the title and the name of the condition, AMD, age-related macular degeneration. Connect age with degeneration, which is one of the major principles of age. You have degeneration, slow or sometimes accelerated degeneration of cells and tissues and hence systems, and you get the degeneration of function. This is a natural process with age. Okay, it's natural. You should expect degeneration of systems, of biological systems, tissues, and cells with age. So there's nothing crazy going on here. But in this case, although it's due to age, this is a severe and irreversible loss of vision. But the process is deterioration. We see that there are two types. One is atrophic, so you're losing size, and size always influences capacity and physiology. Then the second one is neovascular, meaning the combination of something that has to do with the nervous system and blood flow or supply, which we've talked about. Okay, let's go forward to accommodation changes. These are changes to the thickness of the islands, which of course influences light and clearness of vision in this case. So that's slide 147. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue from slide 148, which is refraction changes. Stay tuned.